We began the process through our partnership with the Library of Congress. They conducted a national survey of repositories around the country where they looked at civil rights collections and determined that there were a number of people whose stories had not been told or had not been told sufficiently. We also worked with an advisory committee of civil rights history scholars, people who were involved in the movement, and we have received information from people from the general public, scholars who have contacted us to say these are people that you should consider interviewing. We learned that there were a lot of people who provided all kinds of resources. They were the supporters. I think of a family in Marvell, Arkansas, Gertrude Jackson. And she and her husband opened their home, but because they knew the community quite well, if there were any risk or dangers, they could, for instance, move the person from one family to another family. So they made a commitment to provide this kind of support, and there are lots of people who are out there, and we're interested in finding and documenting their stories. It's a national collection, and it will be a collection that will be available to the public. It will be available for scholars to do research on this very, very important period of time. So it's going to be something that will be accessible to people. They were key leaders in terms of local communities and provided a great deal of direction to the people who were involved in the civil rights movement. They were, because many of the people would have been part of their congregations. They were recognized within the communities. And we're talking about Reverend Lowry, who is one of the great preachers and orators of that time period. And he talks about how the theological philosophy of nonviolence was really important, that it was something that not only changed those people who were involved in the movement as participants, it changed those persons who they felt were oppressing the African American community as well. It comes out of the fact that we're talking about many of these leaders being African American ministers. And they realized that it would be an effective strategy because practically they didn't have the kinds of resources. They couldn't take on law enforcement. It would not have been wise for them to pursue that. That would have been catastrophic. But it's something that I think that they really believe, that nonviolence can be and is a part of life for them. And they incorporate it into everything that they do. And so they want to pass on that philosophy, and they realize that it can be an empowering strategy. And it was, because when people are looking at the televisions, when they're looking at pictures in popular magazines, and they see the demonstrators who are saying, we want basic citizenship, being nonviolent, it created more supporters for them, but it also made them really angry and upset with the law enforcement that was responding to them in such a negative way. So it was an effective strategy, and they realized it. But I think it really was a way of life for them. When we talk to someone like the Reverend C.T. Vivian, who starts out in the 1940s, and he said, it's who I am, it's the way that I live my life. Oh, absolutely. It was difficult for many people to believe in nonviolence. Some of the people that we interviewed said, you know, I didn't want to particularly follow that philosophy. And one of the things that they did was that they had other opportunities. If you felt like you couldn't go out on the street and have someone who might spit in your face or say really mean things to you, then perhaps you made sandwiches or you tried to raise money to help get people out of jail. So they had other opportunities. And they were very deliberate in providing training for people. For instance, with the Children's Crusade, Jim Bevel, who headed the direct action and nonviolence education, actually had workshops for the children. You know, they would let them hear the kinds of mean and negative things that folks were going to say to them on the street, that they might be taunted, so that they were prepared for it. It wasn't a fresh experience when they were out on the street. I think music was a very important part of that resource that people drew on. A number of the interviewees talk about that, but I remember hearing Fannie Lou Hamer talk at one point in time, and she said it was often they were in jail, and she raised a hymn. She was known as a great singer. I've heard Bernice Reagan talk about, again, the power of music to lift their spirits and to encourage them, to let them know that, you know, you'll get through this, you can survive. It also meant that they had to be absolutely persistent, and sometimes they had to be very creative. I recall a story about a situation in South Carolina where the farmers needed to get their harvest out of the field, and the local general store would not sell them the harvester. And that's a fairly expensive piece of equipment. And what they did was to go to another county and find one of the NACP staff persons there, and they bought a harvester in Michigan through Walter Reuther and had it brought to South Carolina in order to be able to get the crops out of the field. So again, sometimes they just had to be really persistent and again creative in the way in which they responded to those situations.